The first time they saw her, the air turned to ice. It wasn't just the cold, though that was there too, creeping into their bones like a silent predator. It was the way everything stopped. The way movement ceased, breath stilled, and bodies locked in place like statues trapped in time. She stood in the center of the room, her silver-white hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders, her pale blue eyes scanning the frozen figures around her. They weren't dead, at least, not yet. Their bodies were rigid, frost clinging to their skin, their faces twisted in mid-motion, frozen in whatever expression they'd last worn. Fear. Confusion. Terror. And then she turned. The only one still moving was him. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, each beat hammering against the eerie silence. His breath was visible in the frigid air, a small cloud of warmth in a room that should have been lifeless. But he wasn't frozen. He wasn't locked in place like the others. He was standing, breathing, staring right into her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The girl, if she even was human, tilted her head slightly, her gaze narrowing. Jake felt something in the air shift, an invisible force pressing against him like an unseen weight. It was as if she was testing him, waiting for him to collapse like the others. But he didn't. His fingers twitched. His legs remained steady. He swallowed hard. "Who are you?" he finally managed, his voice hoarse in the silence. Her lips parted slightly, as if the question surprised her. Then, slowly, she took a step forward. The frost on the floor cracked beneath her boots. Jake's instincts screamed at him to move back, to put distance between them, but something about her made it impossible to look away. She lifted a hand. Jake's breath hitched as her fingers reached out toward him. He braced himself for the cold, for the same numbing freeze that had claimed everyone else in the room. But when her fingertips brushed against his skin, nothing happened. No ice. No burning cold. No paralysis. Just warmth. She blinked, her expression shifting from quiet control to something that almost looked like disbelief. "You're not like them," she murmured, barely louder than a whisper. Jake swallowed again, his throat dry. "And you're not normal." A small, almost amused smile flickered across her lips, but it didn't last. A noise outside the room, distant, but urgent, made her glance toward the door. The spell of stillness broke for a second, and Jake took a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "They're coming," she said, more to herself than to him. "Who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped past him, moving with purpose toward the nearest exit. But just before she reached the door, she hesitated, then turned back to him. For the first time since this nightmare began, there was something in her eyes that wasn't cold indifference. "Come with me." Jake should have said no. He should have stayed put, should have questioned her, demanded answers. But when she looked at him like that, with a mixture of urgency and something else, something unspoken, he found himself nodding. Because one thing was clear. Whatever she was running from, it was worse than her. And if he wanted to survive, he needed to know why he was the only one still standing. Jake didn't know why he followed her. Maybe it was because she was the only other person who could move in that frozen room. Maybe it was because something about her, the way she hesitated before leaving, the way she had looked at him, made him feel like he was a part of something bigger than he understood. Or maybe it was just fear. He didn't want to be alone in this nightmare. The hallway outside was dimly lit, the overhead lights flickering weakly. The air was just as cold as the room behind them, and the walls were coated in a thin layer of frost. It felt like stepping into a place abandoned by time. Footsteps echoed in the distance, not theirs. She was already moving, her pace quick but controlled. Jake hurried to keep up, his breath fogging in the icy air. "Where are we going?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached a corner and pressed herself against the wall, peering down the next hallway. Her posture tensed. A second later, she grabbed his arm and yanked him back into the shadows. He barely had time to react before he saw them. Figures, moving through the frost-covered corridor. They weren't frozen like the others. They walked with purpose, their faces obscured by dark masks. Their movements were smooth, almost unnatural, like they weren't just searching but hunting. Jake's pulse hammered in his ears. He turned to look at the girl beside him, expecting panic, but there was none. Her eyes stayed locked on the figures, her expression unreadable. Then, softly, she whispered, "We have to go. Now." She didn't wait for him to respond. She took his hand and pulled him into a side passage, moving fast but soundlessly. Jake stumbled after her, his mind racing with questions, but he forced himself to focus. They passed empty rooms coated in frost, their silence unnerving. The air itself felt thick, heavy with something unseen. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been natural. And somehow, she was at the center of it. After a few more turns, they finally stopped inside what looked like a storage room. Shelves lined the walls, some covered in ice, others untouched. She let go of his hand and turned to face him. He finally had the chance to ask, "Who are you?" She hesitated. Her gaze flickered toward the door, as if still listening for footsteps. Then, finally, she said, "My name is Kyra." Jake exhaled sharply, as if saying her name made her more real. Kyra. Okay. That's a start. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to calm himself. "You froze everyone back there. Everyone except me. What the hell is going on?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped back, arms folding across her chest. "I don't know why you weren't affected," she admitted, her voice quiet. "That's never happened before." Jake's stomach twisted at the weight of those words. "Never happened before? So you've done this before?" Her expression darkened, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But then she said, "Not like that. I don't control it. It just happens." Jake stared at her, trying to process everything. She wasn't lying. He could see it in the way her fingers trembled slightly, the way she avoided his eyes. "Who are those people back there?" he asked. Kyra's jaw tightened. "The ones in masks? They're looking for me." "Why?" Her lips pressed together. "Because I'm not supposed to exist." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He was about to press her for more, but a sudden noise outside made them both freeze. Footsteps. Closer this time. Kyra grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the back of the storage room. There was a vent, its cover slightly loose. Without hesitating, she pried it open and motioned for him to crawl inside. "You've got to be kidding me," he whispered. "Move," she hissed. Jake swallowed his protests and climbed in. The metal was freezing under his hands and knees, but he forced himself forward. Kyra slipped in behind him, pulling the vent cover back into place just as the door to the storage room creaked open. Through the slits in the vent, Jake could see the masked figures enter. They moved with eerie precision, scanning the room like machines. One of them stepped closer to the vent, pausing just inches from where they hid. Jake held his breath, his heart pounding so loud he swore they could hear it. Then, after what felt like forever, the figure turned away. A voice, low and distorted, spoke. "She was here." Another voice responded. "Find her. She won't get far." The masked figures left. The door shut behind them. Jake let out a slow, shaky breath. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Kyra whispered, "We need to go before they come back." They crawled through the vents, the metal groaning softly beneath them. It was cramped and freezing, but it was the only way to move without being seen. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged into another hallway, this one untouched by ice, as if Kyra's presence had never reached it. Jake shivered, rubbing his arms. "Okay," he said, turning to her. "I think you owe me some real answers now." Kyra hesitated, then finally nodded. "You're right," she said. "But if I tell you, you can't turn back." Jake swallowed hard. He had a feeling his life had already changed the moment he met her. "Try me," he said. Kyra took a slow breath. Then, finally, she spoke. "I was never meant to be here," she said. "I was created." Jake's blood ran cold. "Created?" She nodded. "I was part of an experiment. Something they tried to perfect. But it didn't work the way they wanted. So now, they want to erase me." Jake stared at her. "And what exactly were they trying to perfect?" She looked him in the eyes, her expression unreadable. "The ability to control life and death." Silence stretched between them. Then, in the distance, more footsteps echoed down the hall. They had found them. Jake barely had time to process Kyra's words before the footsteps grew louder. There was no more time for questions. No time for shock or fear. Only time to run. Kyra grabbed his wrist again and pulled him down the hallway, moving fast and silent. Jake's legs burned from running, but he forced himself to keep up. The walls around them were different from the frozen corridors before, no ice, no frost-covered bodies. Just plain metal, cold and sterile. It felt like they had entered a different section of whatever this place was. A sharp voice echoed from behind. "They went this way." Jake's stomach twisted. He could hear the masked figures closing in, their footsteps steady and unrelenting. Whoever they weren't panicked. They were trained. Kyra took a sharp turn, nearly yanking Jake off balance. She reached a door, pressed her palm against a scanner, and for a second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the door slid open. She shoved him inside before slipping in after him, sealing the door shut behind them. Jake pressed his back against the cold metal, trying to catch his breath. The room was small, dimly lit by a single overhead light. A few old crates sat in the corner, covered in dust. It looked like a storage unit, forgotten and untouched. Kyra didn't relax. She pressed her ear against the door, listening. Jake stayed silent, watching her. There was something almost unnatural about the way she moved, so precise, so controlled. Like she had done this 100 times before. After a long moment, she exhaled and turned to him. "They won't stop," she said quietly. Jake ran a hand through his hair. "Yeah, I kind of figured that part out." He looked at her, heart still pounding. "What do they want from you? Just to get rid of you?" Kyra hesitated. "It's not just me." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" She glanced around the room, as if making sure they were truly alone. Then she crouched down, flipping open one of the crates. Inside, buried under layers of fabric, were files. Dozens of them, stacked neatly. She pulled one out, handing it to Jake. He hesitated before taking it. The paper felt cold in his hands. He opened it, scanning the first page. There was a name printed at the top, followed by a long list of numbers and data he didn't understand. But it was the photograph that made his breath catch. It wasn't Kyra. It was someone else. A young man, maybe in his early 20s. His eyes looked hollow, his expression distant. Jake flipped through the pages, seeing more and more data, test results, recorded behaviors. Then he found the last page. Terminated. The word was stamped across the bottom in bold red ink. Jake swallowed hard and looked up at Kyra. "What is this?" She took the file back and placed it inside the crate. "Others like me," she said. They were all part of the same experiment. But none of them made it past a certain point. Jake's throat felt dry. "And you did?" Kyra met his gaze. "Yes." A shiver ran down his spine. He looked at the crates, suddenly realizing how many there were. Each one could be filled with names, with faces, with people who had simply disappeared. Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "So what makes you different? Why are you still alive?" Kyra hesitated, then held up her hand. "Because of this." Jake watched as frost curled across her fingertips, spiraling over her skin like living ice. It moved naturally, effortlessly, forming delicate patterns before vanishing again. "They wanted control," she said quietly. They were trying to make someone, who could manipulate life itself. Stop movement. Stop time. But every attempt ended the same way. She gestured toward the files. They couldn't contain it. The power always turned against them. Jake's stomach twisted. And you? Kyra let her hand fall to her side. I learned to control it. Silence stretched between them. Jake didn't know what to say. He barely understood what any of this meant, but one thing was clear: she was never meant to exist. And now, whoever created her wanted to erase her. Before he could respond, a sound outside the door made them both freeze. A low beep, followed by the faintest click. Someone was unlocking the door. Kyra reacted instantly. She grabbed Jake's hand and pulled him toward the crates, shoving him behind them. Then she pressed her fingers against the floor, and Jake watched in silent horror as a thin layer of frost spread rapidly across the ground. The door slid open. Jake held his breath. The masked figures stepped inside. Their boots crunched against the ice-covered floor. For a second, they hesitated, scanning the small space. The air had changed. It was colder now, thick with something unnatural. One of them stepped forward. And then the ice moved. It wasn't like before, when everything froze instantly. This was different. The frost crawled up their legs, gripping them like invisible hands. One of them tried to move, but his body locked in place. His partner reached for his weapon, but before he could react, the cold swallowed him too. Jake stared in stunned silence as both men froze where they stood, their bodies rigid, their faces trapped in mid-motion. Kyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed Jake's arm and pulled him past them, out of the room and back into the corridor. He barely had time to think. You didn't. They're alive, she interrupted. For now. Jake swallowed hard and kept moving. The hallways stretched ahead of them, endless and sterile. The facility felt massive, a labyrinth of empty rooms and silent corridors. The only sound was their own footsteps, the occasional distant echo of pursuit. After a few more turns, Kyra stopped. She reached for a panel on the wall and placed her palm against it. A soft beep echoed, and then, with a low hiss, a hidden door slid open. Behind it was an elevator. Jake exhaled sharply. You knew this was here? Kyra nodded. I've been looking for it. Jake stepped inside with her, watching as she pressed a button. The doors slid shut, enclosing them in silence. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jake turned to her. Where does this go? Kyra met his gaze. Somewhere they don't want us to find. The elevator lurched downward. Jake had a sinking feeling that whatever lay below was worse than anything they had seen so far. The elevator descended in near silence, the only sound a faint mechanical hum. The air inside felt heavy, like the walls were pressing in on them. Jake kept his eyes on the flickering floor numbers, each one dropping them further into the unknown. Kyra stood still, her expression unreadable. She had been calm before, controlled. But now, there was something different about her. Her hands were clenched into fists, her breathing slower, more measured. Jake swallowed hard. You've been here before, haven't you? Kyra didn't answer right away. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, this is where it started. Before he could ask what she meant, the elevator shuddered to a stop. The doors slid open, revealing a long corridor bathed in cold white light. It looked different from the floors above. Cleaner. More controlled. It didn't have the same eerie frost-covered silence, but something about it felt wrong. Kyra stepped out first, moving with purpose. Jake followed, his footsteps echoing. The corridor stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with thick reinforced doors. Each one had a small panel beside it, blinking red. Jake's pulse quickened. What is this place? Kyra didn't stop walking. Containment. Jake hesitated, glancing at the doors. Whatever was inside, someone had gone to great lengths to keep it locked away. He didn't want to know what would happen if those red lights ever turned green. As they moved deeper into the corridor, a soft hiss broke the silence. Kyra stopped abruptly, grabbing Jake's arm and pulling him into the shadows just as a door at the far end slid open. Jake barely breathed. Two figures stepped out. They weren't wearing the same masks as the ones above. Their uniforms were different, sleek, armored, built for something more than simple security. And the way they moved, calculated, precise. Kyra tensed. Jake felt her grip tighten slightly before she whispered, "They're not like the others." Jake didn't need her to explain. He could tell. The way they scanned the hallway, the way their heads tilted slightly, as if listening to something beyond normal human range, it sent a chill through his bones. Kyra motioned for him to stay low. They moved carefully, ducking behind a large support beam as the two figures walked past. For a moment, it seemed like they would keep going. But then, one of them stopped. Jake froze. The figure turned its head slightly, as if sensing something. Its fingers twitched at its side, and then, slowly, it reached for something on its belt. A scanner. Jake's chest tightened. He didn't know what kind of technology they were using, but if it picked up heat signatures, movement, anything, they were finished. Kyra's breathing was steady, controlled. Then, before Jake could react, she moved. She stepped out from behind the beam, her expression calm. The two figures snapped toward her instantly, but they didn't raise their weapons. They just stared. One of them tilted its head. Then, in a voice that sent a shiver down Jake's spine, it spoke. "You should not be here." Kyra didn't flinch. "And yet, here I am." The second figure took a step closer. Its voice was slightly distorted, like layers of sound overlapping. "Subject 0. You were never meant to leave." Jake's breath caught in his throat. "Subject 0? Kyra stood her ground. "I didn't leave. I survived." For a moment, there was only silence. Then the first figure's hand twitched again, hovering over the device on its belt. Kyra's fingers flexed. The air changed. Jake felt it before he saw it, a shift in the atmosphere, a sudden drop in temperature so sharp it made his lungs burn. Frost curled over the walls, spreading in intricate patterns, creeping toward the figures. The second figure's head snapped toward the frost, watching it move. Then, with eerie calm, it said, "You are unstable." Kyra exhaled, and in an instant, the ice shot forward. The figures reacted fast. Too fast. One of them lunged sideways, barely missing the ice as it speared through the air, slamming into the wall behind them. The second figure moved in a blur, drawing something from its belt, small, metallic, pulsing with blue light. Kyra's eyes widened. Jake barely had time to see what it was before the figure activated it. A pulse of energy exploded outward, and in an instant, Kyra stumbled back, gasping as the frost around them shattered like glass. Jake caught her before she fell, his heart racing. The first figure stepped forward, voice unwavering. "You are incomplete." Kyra gritted her teeth, struggling to stand. Whatever they had used against her, it had done something that hurt her in a way nothing else had. Jake's mind raced. They had to get out of here. Now. He tightened his grip on Kyra and pulled her back as the figures advanced. His eyes darted around the corridor, searching for anything, a way out, a weapon, something. Then he saw it. A control panel near one of the doors. A door that looked thicker, more reinforced than the others. Jake didn't know what was behind it. He didn't care. With a surge of desperation, he lunged toward the panel and slammed his fist against the override button. The red light turned green. A low, mechanical groan filled the hallway as the locks disengaged. The door shuddered. Then, with a slow, ominous hiss, it began to slide open. Jake didn't have time to think. He grabbed Kyra and pulled her back, just as something stirred inside the room. The figures hesitated. For the first time, they didn't move with calculated precision. They stepped back. Jake barely had time to register that before the air changed again. But this time, it wasn't from Kyra. Something was waking up. And Jake had just set it free. A deep, unnatural hum filled the corridor as the door fully slid open. Cold air rushed out, thick with something unseen yet heavy enough to press against Jake's chest. The figures who had been advancing on them suddenly froze, not in the way Kyra's ice worked, but in hesitation. For the first time, they weren't in control. Jake's grip tightened around Kyra as she struggled to stay upright. Whatever that pulse of energy had done to her, she was still feeling its effects. But her gaze was locked on the darkness beyond the open door. Then, something moved inside. At first, it was just a shifting shadow, something too fluid to be a person, too deliberate to be a trick of the light. Then came the sound, deep, slow breathing, like something waking up after a long sleep. The air grew colder, but it wasn't Kyra this time. The two figures exchanged a glance. Then one of them reached for the device on its belt again. That was a mistake. The moment their fingers touched the device, the air inside the room reacted. A pulse of frost, darker and heavier than Kyra's, erupted outward. It was ice, but not like hers. This wasn't delicate or controlled. This was wild, erratic, like a force of nature breaking free. The cold slammed into the two figures, knocking them back before they even had a chance to defend themselves. Jake barely had time to pull Kyra out of the way before the frost crept past them, curling up the walls like jagged, reaching hands. The figures were struggling, their movements suddenly slower, their armor cracking under the sheer intensity of the cold. Then came the voice. Low. Hollow. Ancient. You should not have opened this door. Jake's stomach dropped. He could barely see inside the room, but now, two faintly glowing eyes pierced through the darkness. Kyra stiffened beside him. No, she whispered. Her voice wasn't afraid. It was something else. Dread. Recognition. Jake turned to her. What is it? She swallowed hard, her breathing shallow. It's what came before me. Jake didn't understand. But before he could ask, the thing inside the room stepped forward. The cold grew unbearable. The walls groaned under the weight of it, frost spreading like veins, deeper, darker than anything Kyra had ever created. The figures, those strange, calculated beings, were afraid. They tried to retreat, but their bodies wouldn't move fast enough. The ice had latched onto them, draining them of whatever strength they had. Jake took a step back, instinct screaming at him to run. But Kyra didn't move. The figure from the room finally emerged into full view. Tall. Wrapped in shifting ice and shadows. Its features were sharp, humanoid, but unnatural, like something that had once been a person but had lost the shape of one over time. Its eyes, glowing faintly blue, locked onto Kyra with something almost resembling curiosity. You survived. The words weren't spoken in any normal way. They resonated through the air, sinking into Jake's bones. He didn't know how he understood them, but he did. Kyra's fists clenched. You were supposed to be gone. The figure tilted its head slightly, like it was studying her. Then, with a voice that sent ice through Jake's veins, it said, and yet, here I am. The air became impossibly heavy. The two frozen figures finally stopped struggling. Their bodies stiffened, frost crawling over their helmets, their movements slowing until silence. Jake's stomach twisted. They weren't moving anymore. Kyra exhaled sharply. We have to go. But the frozen figure in front of them wasn't done yet. It lifted a single hand, and the frost on the walls pulsed outward. Jake barely had time to react before the ice came alive. Not just spreading, moving. Shards of frost peeled away from the walls, forming jagged, shifting shapes. They were creatures. Small at first, then larger, their eyes glowing the same eerie blue. They moved unnaturally, like echoes of something that had once lived but no longer did. And they were staring directly at Kyra. Jake grabbed her wrist. Kyra. She didn't look at him. Her gaze was locked onto the being in front of them. What do you want? She asked, her voice steadier than before. The figure took a step closer, the ice beneath its feet cracking softly. Then, in a voice colder than anything Jake had ever heard, it said, "To finish what was started." Then the ice surged forward. Jake barely had time to throw himself and Kyra to the side before the frost-covered creatures lunged, moving too fast for something made of ice. The hallway erupted into chaos. The walls groaned, cracking under the pressure of the freezing air. Jake pulled Kyra up, his heart hammering. "We need a plan, now." Kyra's eyes flickered, her breathing still ragged. But she nodded. "I can stop it. I have to stop it." Jake didn't like how she said that. "And how do you do that without getting yourself killed?" Kyra didn't answer. Instead, she turned back toward the frozen figure. Her fingers curled. For the first time since Jake had met her, she looked angry. The air around her changed. The frost pulsing from the being faltered slightly, as if sensing something had shifted. Kyra took a step forward, her voice unwavering. "You shouldn't have come back." The being tilted its head again, unreadable. Then it said, "We are the same." Kyra's expression hardened. "No. We're not." Jake felt the temperature drop again, but this time, it wasn't coming from their enemy. It was coming from Kyra. For the first time, the frozen figure hesitated. And in that moment, Jake realized something. Kyra wasn't just the only one who had survived. She was the only one who could stop it. The air between them was frozen, not just with ice, but with something heavier, an unspoken force that crackled like a storm about to break. The frozen figure stood motionless, its glowing eyes locked onto Kyra. The ice creatures surrounding them twitched in anticipation, waiting for the command to strike. The cold in the corridor was suffocating, but Jake could still feel something else, something different. The frost was shifting, but not the way it had before. Kyra was changing it. Jake stepped back, barely breathing as the realization hit him. The ice around them wasn't just reacting, it was responding to her. The frozen figure took another step forward, its voice echoing through the air like a whisper carried on the wind. "You can't fight what you are." Kyra's fingers twitched, her breath coming out in short bursts of mist. Her hands trembled, but not from weakness. The frost that had spread across the walls, across the floor, across everything, she was pulling it back. The frozen figure tilted its head slightly. The ice creatures shifted uneasily, sensing something was wrong. "You think you control it?" the figure murmured. "You were made from it." Kyra's jaw tightened. "Then I can end it." Jake barely had time to react before the temperature around them plunged. It wasn't like before, this wasn't slow, creeping frost. This was something deeper, something more raw. The walls groaned under the pressure, the air thick with crackling energy. Kyra's eyes burned with cold light as she lifted her hand. The ice creatures let out a strange, distorted shriek as their bodies cracked apart, shattering into shards of frozen mist. The frozen figure's form wavered, flickering like a flame caught in the wind. And for the first time, it looked afraid. "You were never supposed to survive," the figure hissed, its voice distorting. Kyra's expression hardened. "Then you shouldn't have let me." The ice around them collapsed inward. It wasn't breaking apart, it was pulling back, drawn into Kyra like water returning to the ocean. The walls shook, the ceiling groaned, and the air filled with a sound like glass splintering under immense pressure. The frozen figure staggered. Its body flickered again, the frost that had once been an extension of itself now leaving it. Jake stepped back, barely able to process what he was seeing. Kyra wasn't just stopping the ice, she was taking it back. The frozen figure let out a hollow, whispering gasp as its form flickered one last time. Its glowing eyes dimmed, and then, in an instant, the ice that had kept it together cracked apart. And it was gone. The corridor fell silent. The ice creatures had vanished. The frost that had consumed the walls had melted into nothing. Jake turned to Kyra, his heart still pounding. She was breathing heavily, her arms shaking, but she was standing. The cold light in her eyes slowly faded, and the air around them began to warm, just slightly, but enough to feel real again. Jake swallowed hard. Is it over? Kyra didn't answer right away. She looked at the space where the frozen figure had stood, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she let out a slow, unsteady breath. Yes. Jake exhaled, the weight of everything crashing down on him all at once. He glanced around the now empty corridor, trying to process what had just happened. The facility was still eerily silent, but the oppressive cold was gone. Kyra turned toward him, her expression softer now. We need to leave before. A sharp crack split through the air. Jake barely had time to react before the floor beneath them lurched. The walls shuddered violently, the ceiling groaning as deep fractures splintered through the structure. His stomach dropped. Tell me that's not you. Kyra shook her head, her eyes wide. The ice was holding this place together. Jake felt a surge of panic. And now it's not. Before she could answer, a deafening roar of metal tearing apart filled the air. The entire facility was collapsing. Kyra grabbed his wrist. Run. They sprinted down the corridor as the walls trembled around them, debris crashing to the ground in heavy chunks. The elevator was too far, the only way out was through the emergency tunnels. A massive crack split the ceiling above them. Jake ducked as metal and concrete rained down, narrowly missing them. Kyra didn't stop, pulling him forward with strength he didn't even know she had left. The emergency exit came into view, a reinforced door at the end of the hallway. But before they could reach it, the ground beneath them gave way. Jake's stomach lurched as the floor crumbled, sending him plummeting into darkness. He barely had time to register Kyra's shout before the impact knocked the breath from his lungs. Everything spun. His vision blurred. Then, silence. A dim, flickering light above cast eerie shadows on the space around him. He groaned, pushing himself up. His body ached, but he was alive. A hand grabbed his arm, pulling him up. Kyra. She was breathing hard, her face streaked with dust and sweat. We need to move. Jake nodded, shaking off the dizziness. His eyes adjusted to the dark, and that's when he saw it. Where they had fallen wasn't just another level of the facility. It was something older. The walls weren't made of metal like the rest of the building. They were carved stone, covered in strange, intricate symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. The air was thick with something ancient, something heavy. Kyra's expression darkened. This place, it wasn't built by them. Jake stared at her. Then who built it? Before she could answer, the ground beneath them shifted. A faint glow pulsed from the walls. The air grew colder again, but this time, it wasn't Kyra. Jake's pulse quickened. Tell me I didn't just wake something else up. Kyra didn't answer. She didn't have to. Because somewhere in the darkness, something moved. The cold crept in again, but this time, it wasn't from Kyra. It slithered along the walls, pulsing with an energy that felt old, ancient in a way that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. The symbols carved into the stone glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows across the chamber. The air felt heavier, charged with something neither of them could explain. Kyra took a slow step forward, her fingers grazing the nearest wall. The moment her skin touched the surface, the glow pulsed brighter, and the entire chamber seemed to breathe. A deep, distant hum vibrated through the stone, like something had just woken up. Jake swallowed hard. That's not good, is it? Kyra didn't respond immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the shifting patterns in the stone, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she whispered, I don't think this place was meant to be found. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and a gust of icy wind rushed through the chamber, carrying whispers that weren't coming from either of them. The symbols along the walls started changing, the patterns shifting like they were alive. Jake clenched his fists. We need to get out of here. Now. Kyra exhaled, stepping back. Agreed. They turned toward the only exit, a narrow passageway leading further into the unknown. There was no going back, the way they had fallen was too unstable. They had no choice but to move forward. With each step, the air grew colder, the whispers louder. The passage twisted and turned, opening into another vast chamber, this one dominated by a towering, ice-covered structure at its center. It looked like some kind of monument, its surface carved with the same glowing symbols. But at its base, something else caught Jake's eye. A figure. Frozen in ice. Kyra sucked in a breath. No. Jake frowned. What is it? She took a slow step forward, her hand reaching out hesitantly. I've seen this before. Jake's heart pounded. Where? Kyra didn't answer. She was too focused on the frozen figure. Its face was obscured by frost, its features blurred but vaguely humanoid. The ice surrounding it wasn't natural, it had the same strange glow as the walls. Then, as if responding to her presence, the ice cracked. Jake tensed. Kyra? She didn't move. The cracks in the ice spread, and before either of them could react, the frozen shell shattered completely. The figure collapsed forward, gasping for air. It hit the ground hard, steam rising from its skin as the frost melted away. Jake took a cautious step back. Are they? Before he could finish, the figure's eyes snapped open, and they locked onto Kyra. A slow, rattling breath escaped its lips. You are not alone. Kyra stiffened. Who are you? The figure's skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes, strange, shifting with the same glow as the walls, held something ancient, something knowing. You carry the burden, it rasped. The cycle continues. Jake had no idea what that meant, but judging by the way Kyra's expression darkened, she did. She clenched her fists. No. It ends with me. The figure's gaze flickered to Jake, and something like recognition crossed its face. Then it gave a slow nod. Perhaps it does. The chamber rumbled, and the symbols on the walls flashed brightly. The whispers grew into a howling wind, swirling around them like a storm. Kyra grabbed Jake's wrist. We have to go, now. Jake didn't argue. They ran, the chamber collapsing behind them. The frozen figure didn't follow. It simply watched, unmoving, as the passage sealed itself shut. They didn't stop until they saw light, natural light. A sliver of sky, just ahead. Jake's legs burned as they sprinted toward it. The tunnel opened up into the outside world, the cold air biting at their skin, but it felt real. The facility, the chambers below, it was all gone. Buried. They collapsed onto the frozen ground, breathing hard. The silence around them was almost deafening. Jake turned to Kyra. What the hell just happened? Kyra stared up at the sky, her expression unreadable. It's over. Jake wanted to believe that. He really did. But something about the way she said it made him wonder if she was trying to convince herself more than him. She sat up, rubbing her arms. The frost that had once lingered in her skin was fading. The cold that had been a part of her for so long was leaving. Jake watched her carefully. Are you okay? She nodded, but there was something distant in her eyes. Yeah. He didn't push her. Instead, they sat there in silence, letting the weight of everything settle. Then, finally, Kyra looked at him. Thank you. Jake frowned. For what? For not running away. He let out a small laugh. I tried to run, remember? She smiled, just slightly. But you didn't. Jake sighed, shaking his head. Yeah. Guess I'm an idiot. Kyra looked back at the horizon. The storm had cleared. The sky stretched out endlessly, untouched by the chaos they had left behind. After a long moment, she stood. Come on. Let's go home. Jake hesitated, glancing back at the ruins behind them. Whatever had been down there, whatever had been waiting, it was gone now. Buried beneath the ice. At least, he hoped it was. With one last look, he turned away and followed Kyra into the light.